I wanted to go to the US when I was 10 years old. Watching Hollywood, people giving you all these stories about a great place with great cars, great roads, etc., etc. And that kind of fueled my interest in going there. Going there for a job directly out after a CA was almost impossible. So the easiest conduit to getting to the US was to do a degree in the US, like an MBA. Yeah, the reason I joined Veritas, which was then a $1.5 billion company, the stock price was just shooting through the roof. And, on the day I joined, I got some number of options, and the controller, who was my boss, told me 3 years later or 4 years later, we'll be drinking champagne, clinking away at the millions of dollars you made. I didn't make a penny out of that stock because the stock just went down. But that's a different story. Now, coming to MNC compensations and salary structures, it's actually, I'm not going to waffle. The range is massive. In fact, without taking names of organizations, in some parts of the organization, it could be 40-50 lakhs a year. It could go to 4 crores a year, right? So take your pick. Never take on HR is one thing I'll tell you. It'll hurt you at some point of time or the other in your life. So I think just building my communication skills, building my way of interfacing with people, skills which are critical to being able to influence, they all came in the US. And then just understanding people from other nationalities really helped. So I would underscore the importance of perhaps working in other regions or other nations to, even a couple of years.
My first question for you is, your profile kind of reflects a very ambitious person, right? CA, from what I understand, even CS, MBA in the US. What was your ambition starting out?
So ambition is there, from your studying days. When you're products of a middle-class family, you can't think about being a cricketer or a sports person or so, because that's a lot tougher. The one thing you can do is be above average in studies and then hope that your discipline, hard work, and whatever other skills you bring to the table will help you sustain yourself. I did my CA because when I did my chartered accountancy, it was one of the best roles that a person who didn't want to be an engineer or a doctor could do. CA, you get certain skills like analytic skills, deep technical skills, and also skills around being detail oriented, a skill that is underestimated by all people who don't have it. Yeah, it's a very important skill. But then there are certain things that one doesn't have through a CA, which I thought an MBA would give me. I always wanted to go to the US. In fact, at some point in time when I went to the US, that was an end in itself. I went to the Middle East for a few years to part fund my MBA. In those days, we didn't have the Big Four or the Big Eight, as it was called in India. And it meant good money. So it helped me make some money to part fund my MBA. And then after my MBA, I was just coming out of a depression in the US. So very easily I fitted into Deloitte, which could easily see my skills. I also happened to be working just around the time that the dot-com boom happened. And so it was important for me that I had to make a choice whether to be in a professional services firm like a Deloitte or a KPMG or an EY, or go into industry. And I decided to move into industry because it fitted with my idea of excitement that I look for. So, I think it's very important to be ambitious. I truly believe that you're better off aiming for the sky and falling than not aiming at all, right? And this is said in many, many different ways. I took on business development and CEO roles, etc., because I think the core function of finance is very, very critical to an organization. In a CEO kind of role, in a business development role, I got an appreciation for what a lot of the other core roles expect of finance, and more than that. And so in some sense, stepping out of my comfort zone and moving into different roles actually made me a better person. And I think that did a lot to move me from being a manager to being a leader.
So you were always ambitious, disciplined. So that these are the key qualities you've always imbibed and you've always had. You always wanted to go to the US. First of all, what opportunity did you see there, and do those opportunities still exist today?
Absolutely. Now, different people have different motivations and how they deal with their life. I mean, I wanted to go to the US when I was 10 years old. Watching Hollywood, people giving you all these stories about a great place with great cars, great roads, etc., etc. And that kind of fueled my interest in going there. So I think to your question, did going to the US help in my career? With the way the world is going and becoming more global,
Yeah.
it gave me a level of from a perception standpoint, from a standpoint of people from other countries looking at me, they would be a lot more comfortable dealing with me having spent a decade in the US than somebody that they have not had experience with. The second, and these are traits I'm talking about because they tend to stay with you and they become part of your business persona, which actually
Yeah.
helps you not just in dealing with people across the globe, but even in India.
Yeah.
Another thing which I found myself doing, and I think a lot of people in India do, is interrupt people in conversations, right? And because we are so many of us, we are always interested in saying what we have. And so we just go right in, dive in, regardless of who is midstream or not, we cut them off and say what we want to. And I had no clue I was doing that till one of my managers there said, "Gosh, I've not seen somebody interrupt like you do." I mean, I was offended, but I took that feedback back with me and I worked on it because not only did superficially I became a better conversationalist, I also began to listen more. While that is partially true, everybody likes to interact with people who are polished, who can express themselves in a way in which they don't come across as either intimidating um, or impatient or too fast or too slow. So I think just building my communication skills, building my way of interfacing with people, skills which are critical to being able to influence, they all came in the US. And then just understanding people from other nationalities really helped. So I would underscore the importance of perhaps working in other regions or other nations to, even a couple of years. It just gets you a level of credibility that when you come back, you just become that much more powerful as a finance professional.
So you would recommend a 27 or 28-year-old to move overseas. It could be anywhere. It could be the Middle East, or it could be the US, or it could be Southeast Asia, anywhere.
Critically, what it does is it gives you an insight into the way other people think, other cultures, just makes you more independent, and it also helps you deal with uncertainty, right?
Okay.
In your own familiar environment, these are not things that you have to face, but when you go outside, however many Indians are already there, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's parts of Europe or the US, you still have to go out there and assimilate and succeed, right? So
Okay.
when all that happens, you grow personally and professionally. As Indians,
Yeah.
we tend to be verbose. When
Yeah.
you look at the British or you look at the US, they're very precise in the way they talk. When it comes to answering a question, they answer what you ask for, not what you hoped they would ask for. Now, I might sound a little facetious when I'm making these remarks, but again, the more senior a person is in an organization that you work with, the less time they have to hear you out. So whatever you're saying, make sure that you say exactly what they want. And just to quote, I think it was GB Shaw, George Bernard Shaw, who had once said, somebody asked him to, can you come and address us for 2 minutes? He said, I'm going to have to prepare for 2 hours. So the person said, gosh, 2 hours for a 2 minute meeting. How long would you prepare if it were a 1 hour meeting? He said, that I can do immediately. He said, in a 2 minute meeting, I have your attention only for that time. So what I say has to be of complete value to you. If it's a much longer meeting, yeah, I can keep talking and by I'll get by. It's something like when you prepare slides, right? To a CEO or to a department head or to somebody really senior, not more than 2 or 3 slides. If you can't explain it to them, you've done something wrong. So these might sound like motherhood kind of remarks, but they are critical to the perception of you as a professional.
Right? So usually folks, whenever they go to the US, especially in a big four, their goal is to make partner, and they usually stick around for a very long time. You moved from Deloitte to other organizations. Why move from a big four? And what next? How did you strategize that?
You join a company, then they put you up for H1 green card. So, time just goes by. I was interacting with any number of people outside of the firm who were in startups. They had all these cool ideas they were talking about, whether it was a furniture website or there were a bunch of professors and myself talking about some rocket boosters to um, doing something in voice XML, which was a new language that had come out. These just sounded fascinating, and I was just happy that as an accountant they were allowing me to listen to these conversations. So in terms of wanting to stay on in the Big Four, I think I probably stayed on 2 or 3 years longer than I should have. A career in a Big Four is something that a lot of people would kill for. It just was not for me because I thought I would go outside and be able to make my mark uh, in jobs that were far more interesting for me. Uh, if you see my resume, I've been a bit of a rolling stone, and it has its pluses and minuses. The minuses is you don't probably get as much money as you can by staying in one place. The plus is there's always richness of content. And I think every person has to make that decision on whether they want to get to a place and stick on for life, become a partner. When my thought process when I was a senior manager and probably up for partnership at some point was, do I want to continue doing this for 10, 15 years? Or do I take a chance and go out and do something different, right? Even my coming back to India, largely for family, making sure that my mom could live with me, etc. But it was also about a way of life that I wanted to re-experience. Sometimes you recognize what you like only when you leave that place. Right? So for me, coming back to India was the best decision I could have made. But going and staying in the US and experiencing it, growing professionally and personally, I would not I would not trade it for anything, and I would encourage every person, even if for a short period of time they could go out and earn their stripes in some other place, they'll just become better professionals and perhaps even better human beings.
So after Deloitte, what was the next move? When how did
So I,
you take us through your journey until 2023 till you reach Accenture, right? And you become
so
the
the
MD.
reason, yeah, the reason I joined Veritas, which was then a $1.5 billion company, I joined it when um, it was a company in the valley that had the maximum number of millionaires a week. The stock price was just shooting through the roof. And, on the day I joined, I got some number of options. And the controller, who was my boss, told me 3 years later or 4 years later, we'll be drinking champagne, clinking away at the millions of dollars you made. I didn't make a penny out of that stock because the stock just went down. But that's a different story. So I joined that for clearly the possible return I could make, but more so the position and the role. So the reason I took the Veritas position was um, I was a sales finance director. I was loaned out to the sales department to help the sales organization close contracts. And I was to be the technical person in the sales group, defending the sales group to the finance group. This position, by the way, was pre-Enron, pre-WorldCom, right? Today, a position like that wouldn't exist because it looks really bad, right? So, on the spectrum of what I could be to what I could be, I could have been a bean counter where the finance people would have loved me because I didn't allow a single deal to go through, or I could be a cowboy where I just passed anything through and I exposed the company to ultimate risk. So I had to be somewhere in between. And it's in that role for 3 years or so that I played that I think I had the most heart attacks on a daily basis because they were shouting on both sides. The finance people are saying, "Hey, you're going off the deep end. What the hell is this? You're a finance guy. How can you try and do these kind of deals?" To the salespeople saying, "You're not being aggressive enough," right? And I learned a few other lessons in this, and then I'll come to the other parts of my career. Um, the company, the company's CFO was voted as the top CFO of the US for his ability to deal with Wall Street. Whatever I'm saying is public material, so I'm
Yeah.
not saying something I shouldn't. He used to talk about his having an MBA from Stanford and all these awards, and it but he was a difficult human being. It turned out in retrospect that he had lied on his resume. He didn't have an MBA, and he and a bunch of people in the company were later on part of an SEC investigation. And my colleagues, direct reports, people around me, other than me, touchwood, every person was part of an SEC investigation because of certain hygiene things that I did to make sure I never extended myself out or spoke about things or wrote about things, more importantly, wrote about things that I wasn't aware of. It taught me a lot of lessons in life. And I think it also matured me as a professional because, I just hope that people in their life don't have to go through situations where you have dodgy finance leadership, but it's almost inevitable you'll have either a dodgy promoter or some dodgy kind of leader that you have to deal with. So at some point in time, I decided to come back to India. I took on a similar role within Veritas in Asia Pacific. So I was a regional finance director talking about revenue recognition, giving a lot of technical yarn to people. I would roam around places, but I didn't have a day role. If a contract came in that I could help with and it succeeded, that's all that they expected from me. I decided to move into sales. It was always something I wanted to do because I wanted to get an appreciation for what it is. And that's where I became a regional business development director for Asia Pac, where I had two roles. I had a couple of key clients. By the way, I was on a number. I was more using finance to sell, using ROI, total cost of ownership, to be able to defend any kind of arguments that come from our customers and tell them why they should buy Veritas through Symantec. By then, we had got bought by Symantec. Right? And we had one of our biggest deals in Asia Pac. So that was on the selling side and getting an appreciation for the sales organization. Along with that, I also became the evangelist for technology for Symantec in Asia Pac. The most scary part of my life because I didn't know the T of technology. I don't know the T of technology. But there were certain finance things that I picked up in my life, which is never overextend yourself. I had a bunch of 10 or 15 slides and I had some crack engineers with me. So I would go address CIOs, etc. And all this built a level of confidence that I could then take into subsequent organizations from 2008 till I got out of the corporate world for me to hold myself up as a leader who was function agnostic. You realize that you don't need to know engineering code. You need to know what our products do. You need to know what the company or services. You need to know how it aligns with other companies, what is better, what is worse, what's the ecosystem. So that was Symantec. Then I went to AOL, where I have a good colleague of mine who's very prominent in this group working with. So I will not wax eloquent on my performance out there, lest he writes something which tends to be at odds with what I'm saying. But that was a VP finance position, and a lot about that position was bringing more business to India through the outsourcing mode. We were a finance org. We wanted to get more and more complex work to India. I wasn't there for very long, for a year and a half, but we did get a couple of things which probably meant 10 or 15 heads. But more than the number of heads we got respect from the US for our ability to do complex US work in India. Then I moved to Cisco, and Cisco was very natural because they had goals of being the headquarters of the East. So this was supporting the executive vice president of services who had moved to India. And this was really working with them on futuristic ideas. Cisco is a company that was heavily into talking about what the future of technology would look like. So with that, it was about how do we build the right kind of models to support that, what kind of revenues could be there. Again, totally out of the comfort zone of a typical accountant who looks for, or a typical finance job where you look for today's revenues, what's happening today, what's happening tomorrow, profits, etc. This was how could we get to a point where the future is secured through providing technology that makes the world different. And then, of course, the last one was my role in Accenture, where I joined as a managing director. And initially, I was the delivery finance lead for Accenture operations, or the BPO globally. I was reporting to the CFO of operations, which was then anywhere between 3 billion and odd. Then I became the delivery finance lead for technology, which was a $15 billion part of Accenture. And then my last 1.5 years, I became the integrated delivery finance lead, where I was the finance lead for all services across all markets for Accenture, with the goal being more than doing what I had, to kind of assist the organization as it transforms to something different.
So, can you list 5 things that you learned the hard way while climbing the corporate ladder? And yeah,
I don't know if I can relate 5 things, but I'll just keep saying
yeah,
things off the top,
on
right?
top of your mind. Yeah.
That people only think about themselves, right? I joined the Big Four thinking that this will be a great training ground and everybody sitting out there is waiting to see me become a better professional. Doesn't happen. You have to do everything yourself. Nobody is going to do it for you. Your career is yours. It's not anybody else's to manage. Two is, even your promotion, even your ability to go ask for more money, ask for a promotion, you have to do it yourself. You've got to find the right time. Three, if people can get away, always make sure that where you're taking a decision that is a little contentious, you document it and you get more fingers onto the knife, because otherwise you'll find yourself alone and nobody will back you. Four, make sure that you have somebody who will champion you. The moment you start losing people who are your champions, or who are people who are your advocates, it's a sign that you're either becoming irrelevant in the company or you're on your way out. And then there might be a fifth. But I think if you follow these three or four, you'll you'll be able to safeguard yourself and rise in the organization.
Okay. Do you like push for a raise, push for a promotion, negotiate hard? What? Any instances?
Yeah. So one thing to this may sound cynical. One thing to remember is, if you get something before you expect it or after fighting, you have to realize that you have compromised your future as it relates to raise. So if they gave you 5% and they gave you, and then you fight and you say, no, I deserve 15, you can rest assured that the next year, if you were to get 10, you would get 7. Because at the end of the day, they have a pie. I have personally not believed in fighting. I have believed in expressing my displeasure and walking away like a statesman. As far as raises are concerned, I think a raise, and I think this is information for anybody who's 28 or 38 or whatever age, fight for a raise only if it's going to be lifestyle changing. If it's not worth it, right? The 2 or 3 or 4% will probably be 5 meals or 10 meals, but you've done damage to your goodwill, which, why do you want to do it unless you're thinking of leaving the organization?
How do you manage your managers? And how do you manage your team?
2004, when I came to India, till 2023, I never had a manager in India. I never had a day manager. So I managed them by making sure I set up regular meetings, never giving them unpleasant surprises, making sure that from time to time, even when even when I was close to the end of my career, I'll slip in during a conversation. Hey, Greg, I'm sure I'm doing everything right. That if there's something I'm not doing, you'd have told me. As far as managing my people is concerned, certainly in Accenture, I had people who are far more capable than me on the operational end of things. Very little managing I required to do. I had to spend a lot more time managing their ideas of how their career had to move. And in managing that, their jobs also got managed. As long as people know you are ready to fight for them, or you're giving them advice, or you're giving them counsel that can help them get from point A to point B, and you're not waffling, they will do anything for you. I also spent a lot of time with them, helping them document their conclusions, depending who the audience was, to make sure that they could communicate in ways in which the same thing I spoke about, influencing skills, was improving.
What is the salary structure like in these large MNCs? Like when you reach a CFO level or a managing director level, and there are multiple MDs, there are multiple CFOs. Okay, that's one. And the other one is, when you spoke about returning from the US to India, like, did you take a salary cut?
I took a massive pay cut. I did not come on an expat package. I came on an Indian package. And because my role was not well defined, they gave me a salary to try and make sure I didn't come back. Right? It was probably 1/10 my salary there. It was, I mean, I won't say it's insulting or not insulting. That's what they decided to give. And then I made some, to use your words, almost career limiting kind of moves where I used some very expressive language on what I thought about the HR who had done my salary thing. And I told them that I'm not suggesting that anybody does it, but I told them that, look, if they don't have enough HR organizations to benchmark against to find out what my compensation to be, I'll pay for it. I said, I'll pay for it, and you go and get this documented, because what you've given me is, it all ended well, but it had its residual impact. Never take on HR is one thing I would tell you. It'll hurt you at some point of time or the other in your life. Now, coming to MNC compensations and salary structures, it's actually, I'm not going to waffle. The range is massive. In fact, without taking names of organizations, in some parts of the organization, it could be 40, 50 lakhs a year. It could go to 4 crores a year, right? So take your pick. So I would say the median or the average salary at levels of experience which are beyond, let's say, 20, 25 years should be, 1 crore plus stock plus, variable, and, it'll go higher and higher. Now, one thing that people should realize, and they will come to points in their career where they have to ponder about it, when you don't get promoted, right? Most of the time, so when I entered Accenture as an MD. Had I been in Accenture and I had to go up through the ranks and become an MD, there's a possibility it could have been a lot tougher. And it's kind of funny that organizations invest so much time and effort in people, and when it comes time to making an important decision, they find reasons like lacks executive presence, doesn't communicate well. When the person has been there for 10, 12 years, and then they go out and get somebody to take on that role. So the person who comes from the outside actually gets a premium, both in terms of designation and perhaps in compensation. So that's something to keep in mind, where, when you find yourself getting stuck, whether it makes sense to continue to hammer at the same place, because you may never get the truth. So large gap in salaries, 1 crore plus stock, lots of things that can keep you happy, committed, but important to keep in mind, depending on your age, that you don't price yourself out of the market, because people end up doing that. And if, God forbid, there is a situation where they could get laid off, they have to go to something which they may think is suboptimal.
What do you mean, price your? What was the last statement?
I said price yourself out of the market. So, for example, if you're getting a salary which is much higher than, let's say, a similar person in another organization, while it's good in the short run,
Yeah.
in case you find yourself at some point in time laid off for some reason, A, you may not get the same salary, which is okay. B, the other company may not be willing to hire you, because they will think that the moment the market conditions improve and the person gets a similar salary, they leave. So you could get hit at both ends. So I'm just saying, be careful that you try to evaluate where you are salary wise, position wise, and your future.
So Sriram, the question that we get asked most of the time is, how competitive is the corporate world? And you've explained to your journey, but what helped you grow? Like some skills, or what is it that helped you grow when you think of it?
Storytelling skills. I would probably say my ability to articulate financial information and align it to business outcomes, probably better than many of my peers. I would dare say even many of my superiors, is probably what marked me out, right? I, then there's communication skills. I think how you carry yourself, and but largely I would say the ability to influence. When you can do it with confidence, when you the other thing that I want to call out, which is going to be a trend that everybody is going to have to get comfortable with, is matrixed organizations. You don't know who your boss is. You're one direct boss, but everybody in many other organizations is your boss. How do you deal with the complexity of a matrixed organization. You're not going to like everybody, everybody is not going to like you. But how do you get things done in such a fluid environment where organizational structures keep getting collapsed, etc.? So for the 1 minute, I'll just leave it with that. But these are some of the areas where I was particularly good, and the ability to handle ambiguity.
So when you're talking about storytelling, again under a minute, how do you develop storytelling?
Sure.
Yeah.
Storytelling, I'm a fiction writer. I write plays. But the idea of when you write fiction, or when you're involved in the world of make believe, you're always thinking about who you're talking to, and then you
Yeah.
appeal to what they want. So that's, I think, a critical element of storytelling, which is know your audience, know who you're talking to, whether they want detailed responses or not, but always talk to what they're interested in. The second thing is, when you talk about your second question again, which was on
Matrix.
matrix organization. That's very tough. You have to, you need to have people who become your ambassadors, or you get some level of advocacy where people are championing you. When you move from one organization to the other, it becomes a little difficult. So in matrix organizations, I would say watch out for the politics of organizations. So that's matrix organizations. You have to understand who are the power brokers, who are the people who are making calls, and how to work with them.
What if somebody is not good at storytelling? How can you acquire that skill?
A lot of people I have told who were in my span have joined Toastmasters, right? It's just one example of a place that one can go to and pick up storytelling skills. Again, practice with people who are in the organization. Find out people who are particularly good at it and tell them, okay, how would you tell this? Would you tell it any differently? And learn from people. In fact, there was a manager that I had who once said, there's not a single original thing I've said in my life. I found that very poignant, right? And he was really senior. He was in the board of Deloitte at one point in time. I thought if a person who was so senior could say that, it really means that everything that we know and do and talk about is incremental. So why not learn from people around you who are better than you? I don't think there's anything to be embarrassed about. It's just a way of picking up a skill through others that you otherwise might not have. So I think it's practice by yourself. Find somebody who's particularly good at it, and then give it to them. If you have a good kind of equation, say, how do you present this any differently? And then learn from it. And you do that, half a dozen, 10 times, 15 times, you'll become much better at it.
You don't have to be born with a storytelling ability, though some folks are. Okay, cool. Okay, before I go to the final one, I have this. How do you deal with criticism?
There's a very small set of people who can actually deal with it really positively. For me, when I have been the victim of any criticism, the goal is not scream and shout at the person who's given it, because it's their opinion and I have to respect it. It is, I will not let them say the same thing again. But the emotion that goes into it is not I want to improve myself because I'll become a better human being, but it is I want to improve myself because I don't want that person saying it again, which is not the best way to be. But since you asked the question, and I'm here giving who I really am, as opposed to, and hopefully your audience will respect me more for being who I am, as opposed
Yeah,
to telling you what's the perfect answer to say.
yeah,
I've always reacted to criticism in a way in which what happens is I tend to ignore the good things that were said and focus on the criticism that's given. And that's actually a very Indian middle class thing also in some kinds of ways, where we are taught from when we are young that don't get carried away by praise. Take that criticism and work on it till you negate it. But yeah, I've managed to learn certain things that professionally came in the way and improve on it. I know one or two people in my group who are, who can take criticism so well that they almost appear like masochists. So what they're able to do is they're able to separate the criticism from the individual, right? Which means more often than not, your manager or whoever is giving you the criticism is not going to impact your life. They're going to impact your salary. But if you think that by listening to that criticism and working on it, you're doing something good for yourself, and you completely ignore the fact that it is person X or Y, you actually end up working on the criticism to your advantage. And people who can take feedback well, they are highly respected in an organization. In fact, I would go to the point that people almost stop criticizing them because they take it so well. On the other hand, if you don't take it well, you'll get more of it.
what are the emerging trends or skills, which finance folks who want to move, who are finance controllers right now, heads of finance, or you want to move up, what should they have?
Better communication skills. Depending on whether you're in a global organization or not, understanding people, across the across different countries. For example, Indians' best effort is good. I'll do my best to get it done. In other countries, like in the US in particular, you either get it done or you don't. There are no excuses once you've committed to it. It's a very important thing to learn. Understanding nuances of language. If you do badly, an Indian boss might say, "Hey, this is terrible." A US boss might say, "I might not have done it that way." Now, you may walk away thinking, okay, he may not have done it that way. He's not saying I've done it badly, or she's not saying I've done it badly. So just being, I think it's, I think so I'm talking on the people side, then I'll come on the technology and the other things that are going to be important. Okay. So on the people side, being very attuned to the people in your ecosystem that you're dealing with, what makes them tick, what's important to them, because you're mapping to them, right? And this is leaders not just within the finance function, but any function within the business that you're going to be working with, because at the end of the day, they're going to be writing your ticket to promotion, to your better raises, and to your sustenance in the company. Now, the other things are being aware of how technology is changing, for you to use it within finance, and for you to also start thinking about your people. If they're doing roles that are more, more transactional in nature, there's going to be a point in time where they're going to probably get displaced. You owe it to them to help them either upskill. This may not necessarily help you rise in the organization, but it'll help you sleep better at night. So what are you doing to try and see what's coming down the road in terms of automation, in terms of what roles will continue, and where you need to spend your time? And then one more thing, which I think a lot of finance people miss, and that is focusing on business models, right? All finance people are very good at understanding costs, how to squeeze out money even from a stone. But how do you change the revenue structure, right? Through business models. And many times the business model is looked on as something that the sales organization should do, or the business development organization should do, or the CEO should do, or somebody else. But actually, finance can play a very important role. Look for technology, very important, because technology is a disruptor, both for the products of the company or the services, as well as within finance. There was Excel, now there's Power BI. The impact of Power BI on the data that's going to the CEO in the form of a dashboard is an order of magnitude better and happens quicker. More you can automate, the more information you can give, because there's reams and reams of information, the better off you are.
And you've grown really well. A lot of people don't achieve what you have in the truest sense, right? It's such a crowded place. But do you think you made it in the corporate world where you thought you would, or you felt that you could do a lot?
Yeah. So if I had to change something in my life, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know where I'd have gone, frankly. I think we're all lucky in things that we don't realize we're lucky about. If there was one thing that I would change, I would have been, certainly in the early to middle part of my career, I would be less cynical than I was, right? I think there's something about being optimistic and believing in the system that actually helps you do more. When you're cynical, you don't give the best out of yourself, and you're really not helpful to the people around you, right? So that's one thing I would have changed. I don't know if it would have got me any further, but it would have made me feel better about myself than I feel, particularly in the early years of I would say in the last 10, 15 years of my life. Maybe because I saw the light at the end of the tunnel or whatever, I just became a lot more optimistic, and I told myself that I could do things which are in my control and not keep second guessing all the things that are happening around me that I wanted to be cynical about. That's the only change I would have made. I think when you go into work with positivity, bad things may also happen, but then you've given the best account of yourself. And that's what I'd encourage every person on this call. I wish somebody had told me that, 15 years or 20 years back, that get the best self of yourself. Don't be cynical. Things will happen that are good, bad, just accept it in your stride, rather than think that, the organization is out to get the best out of me, but not see me at my best.
That's a great perspective. So once, your term at Accenture was over, and, like, you stepped down from being the managing director of that segment, how was life?
So,
Yeah.
everybody starts thinking about what's the next thing at some point of time in their age, right? And at some point of time in their life. And, so, I mean, I'm 59. So even if it didn't, even if I didn't leave then, I was going to have to leave. And you speak to people around you who've left. And one thing that I heard, which was a common theme, is however many people like you and report to you and you work with, once you leave, no one will call you. Right? And to me, it was just a remark, but it hit me when I left, right? And I realized that they have a job that they're doing 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. I wrote Turnaround. It had 14 shows. It was therapeutic in some sense because it conveyed a lot of things that I believed in that are wrong organizationally. And then, I started teaching English to some underprivileged ninth and 10th grade students in a local school here, who are all children of drivers. And I'm using this only to convey, nothing wrong with
Yeah.
being a driver.
Yeah.
It was very inspiring because I was talking like a corporate person to them, and all the children were laughing at me all the time. I enjoyed it because this is a part of my life also I have to experience. I think
Yeah.
the thing I keep telling myself, I don't know how well I'll be able to do it, is in whatever phase you are in your life, you have to accept and take it with dignity. I'll find out things on the NGO end of things to contribute my time, and on the leadership end of time, I've signed up to be a facilitator for one of the big four for some of their courses. So those things will continue. More from a standpoint of keeping myself busy. I read a lot. There's another play of mine that might get directed at some point in time, and who knows what other things are there. The important thing is to keep healthy and to
Yeah.
stay positive. I discovered that a little late in life, and I would hopefully, for whatever time is remaining, I continue to be positive and give the best account of myself to whoever I interact with.
So yes, Sriram, I mean, this has really been a great conversation. I know it's really amazing, and I think you should really get into a lot of coaching and mentoring because this is everybody's problem.
In fact, the high point of my life is that the people who worked for me always saw me as very straight and living my life on my terms. And I hope I
Yeah.
can continue doing that for whatever is left.